Document number 13, 1978, there were hearings on herbicide Agent Orange. And this herbicide was commonly referred to by its code name, Agent Orange, but was really a mixture of 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T. And the N-butyl ester, we know, was standards from 1959 when it was first written about in the CFR, probably prior to that as well. I haven't found that. But in 1978, these hearings on herbicide Agent Orange were at the House of Representatives Subcommittee on Medical Facilities and Benefits Committees on Veterans Affairs in Washington, D.C. And at that time in 1978, this was when the battle for the Vietnam veterans benefits was going on. And the General Accounting Office reported that the Department of Defense officials had little information on the number of personnel exposed or the extent of exposure to this herbicide. They're talking about Vietnam here. But they also know that they used it on other territories, and they don't know how many people were exposed. But Agent Orange here in this hearing, they say that 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T equals Agent Orange. It is a 50-50 mixture of 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T and was the most widely used herbicide in Vietnam. Doesn't say anything at all about the N-butyl ester in this summary here. And I've seen it many times just written 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T equals Agent Orange. Alvin Young has written that 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T does not equal Agent Orange. But here we have a testimony in Congress from the General Accounting Office that says the 50-50 mixture of 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T equals Agent Orange. And they also say the defense has little information on how many people are exposed. And there was another agent, purple, a similar mixture. There was, before Agent Orange, there was Agent Purple, which is a similar mixture of 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T that contained a different form of 2,4,5-T. It was replaced by Agent Orange in 1964. So from 1948 to 1964, they were sending purple, which had a higher amount of dioxin. And we got a lot of it, and it lasts 50 to 100 years in the soil. So there you go. So the contaminant TCDD, that's the dioxin, is produced during manufacture of 2,4,5-T. And so they couldn't really control it. They didn't know in any one batch how much dioxin there was. So here in 1978, they say that in 1971, Defense directed the Air Force to dispose of all remaining stocks of Agent Orange. That was after Vietnam. These stocks contain dioxin contaminant levels ranging from 0.05 to 47 parts per million dioxin and averaging about 2 parts per million. Current is 1978, remember. Manufacturing standards for 2,4,5-T require that the dioxin levels be less than 0.1 part per million. So when they found out in 1968 that there was an issue, they issued a new procurement specification, asking the contractors to make it closer to 0.01. It says in the Vietnam veterans, only a few military personnel would have been exposed directly to spraying, but some personnel could have been exposed indirectly to low levels of herbicides through ingestion of contaminated drinking water and food and by skin contact. Remember, they put 2,4-D and a lot of it in Lake Gatun to keep the canal clear. And 2,4-D does cause cancer. We were drinking that water. That was our drinking water, our showering water, our bathing water, our cooking water, our fishing water, recreational water, you name it. And They say we could not have been harmed. Says the herbicides used in Vietnam were also used in the United States when the military spraying program began. So, before Vietnam came along, they were already using these chemicals by the USDA. That's why that paper was written, how the USDA chemicals became chemical weapons, because they were already being used to kill weeds. They knew they worked, and then they made them a secret weapon called Agent Orange, painted a stripe on the barrels, and sent them to war. Says the military studies made before the program began were concerned primarily with military effectiveness rather than environmental and health effects. They really didn't know if there was going to be any health effects. Defense officials believe that no firm link has been made between long-term adverse health effects and exposure to herbicides in Vietnam. They stated that defense has no plans to conduct epidemiological studies on the possible ill effects of herbicide use in Vietnam, and has not issued any instructions to its medical facilities to monitor complaints of illness possibly resulting from herbicide exposure. This is 1978 when Vietnam veterans were fighting for their benefits, and now Panama are fighting for their benefits, and the Department of Defense has no plans, I'm sure, to conduct any kind of studies on Panama. In fact, we were supposed to be studied with the PACT Act, and we were axed out. Don't know why. And at this time in 78, they didn't even have any firm link between long-term adverse health effects and exposure to herbicides in Vietnam. Well, that ship has sailed, and we know that there is a link between exposure to herbicides like we were. It says here, and this is by the military use of herbicides in South Vietnam. The herbicidal agents used in South Vietnam were identified by code names that referred to the color bands painted on the containers of the chemicals: orange, white, blue, and purple. Agent Orange is a 50-50 mixture of the N-butyl esters of 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T, period. So to say that, there's some kind of magical difference between a tactical brand and a commercial brand in writings where the VA and DOD deny the Panama veterans benefits is questionable. So there was a defense-funded study which discussed possible health hazards from massive and repetitive applications of herbicides. If you've read my book, I've listed many herbicides and pesticides that were used simultaneously in the Panama Canal Zone all around us for taking care of the mosquitoes, the crawling bugs, the ants, you name it. And we were exposed to many things at the same time. They said here that in 1978, the direct toxicity hazards to people and animals on the ground is nearly non-existent. That was 1978. That's been proven false. And they say we use herbicides in large amounts on the cropland in this country. That's scary, but it's true. Page 11, their first witness this morning was Major General Dedinger. He was the Deputy Surgeon General of the U.S. Air Force, and he had sitting next to him Dr. or Captain Alvin Young, who has a PhD in plant physiology, who's been with the herbicide program in the Air Force for the last 10 years. So let's think about this. This is 1978, and he's been in the program since 1968. He certainly should know of all of these documents. It says here, this is the General Dedinger with Alvin Young sitting next to him. General Dedinger says, all herbicides were procured from commercial sources to a military specification. The military specification is all about the packaging only. It only says to put it in a 55-gallon drum or a 5-gallon pail and put a orange stripe around the container. 2 phenoxy herbicides, 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T, both registered by EPA, were used to formulate herbicide orange. And then it says down here that 2,4-D plus 2,4,5-T equals Agent Orange. So they got them from the EPA, and they said that Agent Orange wasn't registered, and yet these were registered by the EPA. Something's not perfect. So this is 1978, and General Dettinger was asked, are there any ongoing studies in the Department of Defense on the question of health effects, possibly long-range health effects of dioxin or 2,4-D or 2,4,5-T? General Dettinger answered, we have none, at least in the Air Force, ongoing at the present time. No, sir. And he says, we know that the EPA has some studies which are just starting. So they're just starting their studies in 1978. And from 1948 to 1978, this stuff was used on every base, according to the technical manual. Dr. Holder is of the Dow Chemical Company. You can see that up here. Ben Holder, medical director of the Dow Chemical Company. And he says that the 2,4,5-T supplied to the military during the Vietnam War had concentrations of dioxin, TCDD, varying from 1 part per million ppm to about 50 parts per million. The phenoxy herbicide was a standard grade agricultural product. Let me say that again. The herbicide was a standard grade agricultural product, so says the director from Dow Chemical Company who supplied the chemicals for the Vietnam War, or were one of the companies that supplied the chemicals. So in this hearing, Colonel Baer stated in response to various questions that the DOD never contracted with chemical companies to have the components of Agent Orange specially made for the DOD. The available production of the chemical industry in the USA, about 8 companies, was used. They were already manufacturing for the USDA. They didn't have to make anything special. They just had to make sure that it all went towards the military effort. So this is what Colonel Baer said in this hearing, and Alvin Young was present in this hearing. In this hearing, they say, Mr. Chairman, we commend you and this committee for recognizing the need for exploring the possible deleterious effects related to use of Agent Orange in Vietnam upon our Vietnam veterans so exposed. We recognize a degree of apathy may be encountered within government agencies due to possible culpability or reluctance to establish etiology, which could generate a large volume of claims for service-connected disability. So they didn't want to help the Vietnam veterans, just like now they don't want to help the Panama veterans. In this hearing, it says, I really do not think, and I recognize what you say, that culpability is a question any longer. What we are interested in is results. If there is an adverse result, then we want to do something about it for our veterans. In that regard, I think I can speak for this committee by saying that insofar as the potential for a large volume of claims for service-connected disability is concerned, it should no longer be a question. That was 1978 for the Vietnam veterans, and I agree now it should no longer be a question for the Panama veterans. It's just that we're not being heard. They're not looking at the evidence.